The crowbar crashed through the windshield like thunder, glass exploding everywhere as Karen screamed, "This is what you get for parking in my spot." But as the sirens wailed and the radio crackled to life, her face went white with horror. The badge on the dashboard, the police equipment, the growing crowd of officers surrounding her. She'd just destroyed a cop car, and now she was about to learn that some mistakes cost everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Grove Shopping Center as Detective Sarah Chen pulled into what she thought was an empty parking space. After 16 hours of chasing down leads on a string of break-ins, all she wanted was coffee and 10 minutes of peace before heading back to the station. She didn't notice the woman in the silver Honda Civic 2 rows over, watching her with the intensity of a hawk eyeing prey. Karen Whitman had circled this parking lot for 27 minutes. 27 excruciating minutes in her pristine Honda, listening to her mother's voice on speakerphone dissecting every perceived slight from her sister's wedding last weekend. The spot directly in front of Java Junction, her spot, the one she'd claimed every Tuesday for 3 years, had been occupied by some inconsiderate fool in a black sedan. "Mother, I have to go," Karen snapped, jabbing the end call button with enough force to crack a nail. "Some idiot is in my parking space." She'd been planning to confront whoever dared park there, to explain with crystal clarity that this wasn't just any space, this was hers by right of routine, by the sacred law of habit. But then the driver had gotten out and disappeared into the coffee shop, leaving Karen to stew in her own indignation. The sedan sat there like a middle finger pointed directly at her sense of order. Basic black tinted windows. Nothing special about it except for its audacious occupation of sacred ground. Karen's fingers drummed against her steering wheel as she watched the coffee shop entrance. 10 minutes passed. 15. Her latte was getting cold in the Q folder, and her day was already spiraling into chaos. She had a homeowners association meeting at 11, then lunch with the ladies from her book club, and this delay was threatening to topple her carefully constructed schedule like dominoes. "Inconsiderate piece of garbage," she muttered, pulling out her phone to take a picture of the license plate. She'd posted on the neighborhood Facebook group with a scathing commentary about courtesy and respect, but as she aimed her camera, something inside her snapped. The photo wasn't enough. A Facebook post wouldn't teach this person anything real about consequences. Karen Whitman had spent her entire 43 years being ignored, dismissed, and walked over by people who thought they were better than her. Her ex-husband, her boss at the insurance office, the snotty barista who always rolled her eyes when Karen ordered her complicated latte. Modification. Not today. Karen popped open her trunk with a decisive click. Next to her emergency kit and jumper cables sat the crowbar she'd bought after that home security seminar at the community center. "Be prepared," the instructor had said. "Take control of your environment. Time to take control." The weight of the crowbar felt righteous in her hands as she approached the sedan. Through the tinted windows, she could make out the vague shapes of the interior, someone's jacket thrown across the back seat, papers scattered on the dashboard, the usual detritus of a thoughtless person living a thoughtless life. "You want to park like you own the place," Karen whispered, raising the crowbar above her head. "Let's see how you like owning this." The first blow landed squarely on the hood with a satisfying crunch of metal. The second took out the driver's side headlight. In a shower of plastic fragments, Karen felt a surge of pure adrenaline, the kind she hadn't experienced since her divorce was finalized and she'd taken a baseball bat to Richard's golf clubs. "This is what happens when you disrespect people," she shouted, not caring who heard. The crowbar came down again, spiderwebbing across the windshield. "This is what you get for thinking you're special." A small crowd had begun to gather at the edges of the parking lot. Someone was filming with their phone. Karen didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see what happened to people who thought they could walk all over Karen Whitman. The rear window exploded inward as she brought the crowbar down with both hands. Glass cascaded onto the asphalt like deadly snow, and Karen felt something close to euphoria. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was the one in control. She was the one making things happen instead of having things happen to her. Ma'am, stop." The voice came from behind her, urgent and commanding, but Karen was beyond stopping. She spun toward the sound, crowbar still raised, ready to explain to whoever dared interrupt her moment of justified revenge exactly why this person deserved everything they were getting. But the words died in her throat. The man standing 20 feet away wasn't just any coffee shop patron. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that couldn't quite hide the tactical vest underneath. His hand rested casually on his hip, right where the grip of a service weapon would be. "Put the crowbar down, Detective," Mike Torres said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from 15 years of dealing with people having very bad days. "Let's talk about this." Karen's eyes darted past him to the growing crowd, then back to the destroyed sedan. Something cold and terrible was beginning to crystallize in her stomach, but she pushed it away. She was in the right here. This person had stolen her spot, and she'd simply defended what was hers. "This inconsiderate jerk parked in my space," she said, gesturing at the car with the crowbar. "I park here every Tuesday. Everyone knows this is my spot." Torres took a careful step closer, his trained eyes cataloging the damage. Shattered windows, dented hood, Deep gouges in the paint. Easily $5,000 in destruction? Maybe more. Ma'am, I need you to put that weapon down and step away from the vehicle. Weapon, Karen laughed, high and sharp. It's a crowbar, and this person deserved it. You don't just take someone's parking space and expect no consequences. That's not how this works, Torres said, pulling out his phone. You can't destroy someone's property because you're upset about a parking space. Karen watched him dial, that cold feeling in her stomach spreading like ice water through her veins. But she was committed now. She'd crossed a line, and the only way forward was to justify it. To make everyone understand that she'd been wronged first. I've been parking here every Tuesday for 3 years, she repeated, louder this time. 3 years. Everyone who works at these shops knows this is my spot. It's common courtesy. Torres finished his call and looked at her with something that might have been pitied. Ma'am, there are no assigned parking spaces in a public lot. This is destruction of property, and I'm going to need you to. Don't you dare lecture me about property. Karen's voice cracked like a whip across the parking lot. Where's the owner? Let them come out here and explain why they thought they could just take what's mine. She was shouting now, the crowbar still clutched in her white-knuckled fists, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her cheeks. The crowd was growing larger, phones pointed in her direction like accusatory fingers. Someone was definitely live streaming this, and tomorrow it would be all over social media. But Karen was beyond caring about anything except making these people understand. Torres held up his hands in a calming gesture. The owner is right here, ma'am. You're looking at him. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She blinked hard, trying to process what he'd just said. What? That's my car, Torres said quietly. My personal vehicle. And I'm a detective. With the Metro Police Department, the crowbar slipped from Karen's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the asphalt with a sound like breaking bones. The ice water in her stomach turned to liquid nitrogen, freezing her from the inside out. That's not possible, she whispered. But even as she said it, her eyes were seeing details she'd missed before. The radio antenna she'd assumed was aftermarket, the small, nearly invisible Department of Justice decal in the rear window, the tactical gear visible through the destroyed windshield. Torres reached into his back pocket and pulled out his badge, holding it where she could see. Detective Mike Torres, Metro PD, and you've just committed felony destruction of police property. The world tilted sideways. Karen felt her knees buckle, and she grabbed the side mirror of a nearby car to keep from falling. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of mistake, some cosmic joke being played at her expense. I didn't know, she gasped. I didn't know it was. I thought it was just some inconsiderate. Ma'am, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. The voice wasn't Torres anymore. 2 uniformed officers had arrived while Karen was having her breakdown, and they approached her with the careful, measured steps of people who dealt with unstable situations for a living. This is a mistake, Karen said, backing away from them. I can pay for the damage. I have insurance. We can work this out. But she could see in their faces that it was already far too late for working anything out. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, broken something that couldn't be unbroken. The cuffs clicked around her wrists with a finality that echoed through her bones. Karen Whitman, you're under arrest for destruction of police property, vandalism, and public dispute. The holding cell at Metro Police Department smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Karen sat on the narrow bench, her designer blazer wrinkled beyond repair, staring at the concrete walls that had become her world for the past 4 hours. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a crushing weight of reality that pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. Detective Torres had been professional but distant during her booking, treating her with the same clinical efficiency he probably reserved for drunk drivers and shoplifters. The fingerprinting, the mugshot, the inventory of her personal belongings, all of it conducted with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. Whitman. The guard's voice echoed off the walls. Your lawyers. Here. Karen's heart jumped. She'd called her attorney, Marcus Webb, from the phone in the booking area, though the conversation had been stilted and surreal. How do you explain to your estate planning lawyer that you'd just destroyed a police detective's car with a crowbar? The interview room was barely larger than a closet, furnished with a metal table and 2 uncomfortable chairs. Marcus looked exactly like what he was, a suburban lawyer who specialized in wills and real estate closings, not criminal defense. His usually perfect silver hair was slightly disheveled, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the obvious discomfort in his eyes. Karen, what the hell happened? He said, settling his briefcase on the table with shaking hands. The desk sergeant told me you attacked a police officer's vehicle with a crowbar. Please tell me there's been some kind of mistake. Karen opened her mouth to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. How could she make him understand the fury that had consumed her, the righteous indignation that had felt so justified in the moment? How could she explain that she'd been pushed to her breaking point by something as simple as a parking space? It wasn't like that, she finally managed. I didn't know it was a police car. It was unmarked, and this person had taken my parking spot. The one I always use at the shopping center. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching horror. You destroyed someone's car over a parking space. The judgment in his voice made Karen's cheeks burn. You don't understand. I've been parking in that same spot every Tuesday for 3 years. Everyone who works there knows it's mine. It's not about the space, it's about respect. Respect. Marcus's voice cracked on the word. Karen, you're looking at felony charges. Destruction of police property is a Class C felony in this state. You could be facing up to 5 years in prison. The number hit her like a slap. 5 years. Karen had never even had a speeding ticket, and now she was facing the possibility of prison time because some detective had parked in the wrong place at the wrong time. There has to be something we can do, she said, leaning forward across the table. Plea bargain, community service, something. I'll pay for the damages, whatever it costs. Marcus pulled out a yellow legal pad and began scribbling notes. The damage estimate came back this afternoon. Between the bodywork, the windows, and the electronics damage from glass getting into the console, we're looking at nearly $8. That pushes this into felony territory even without the police property enhancement. $8,000. Karen felt the number settle in her stomach like a stone. She had the money, her divorce settlement had been generous, and her job at the insurance company paid well enough, but the sheer scope of what she'd done was beginning to sink in. What about the detective, she asked. Can we talk to him? Explain that it was a misunderstanding. The Takivitahir. Marcus flipped through his notes. I spoke with the prosecutor assigned to your case. Torres isn't pressing for maximum charges, but he's not backing down either. Apparently this isn't his first experience with, let's call it, parking rage. He's seen what happens when people think they can solve problems with violence. The words stung because they were true. Karen had solved her problem with violence. At least, she'd tried to. The fact that she'd created a much bigger problem in the process was beside the point. There's something else, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The incident was filmed. Multiple people got video of you attacking the car, and it's already making the rounds on social media. Karen's blood turned to ice water. What do you mean, social media? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. There she was, frozen in a moment of pure rage, crowbar raised above her head like some demented version of a Norse goddess. The caption read, Karen goes nuclear over parking spot, destroys cop car by mistake. The video had been viewed 847,000 times in 4 hours. Oh God, Karen whispered, covering her face with her hands. Oh God, everyone's going to see this. It gets worse, Marcus said gently. Someone identified you. Your name, your employer, your address, it's all over the comments. The insurance company has already called asking for a statement. Karen's world tilted on its axis. Her job, her reputation, her carefully constructed life, all of it was crumbling because of 30 seconds of uncontrolled rage. She thought about her coworkers seeing the video, her neighbors, the women in her book club. The mother who had spent the entire morning criticizing her sister's wedding would have plenty of ammunition now. We need damage control, she said, her voice barely steady. Can we get the video taken down? It's on at least 6 different platforms now, Marcus replied. And even if we could remove the original, people have already downloaded and shared it. This kind of thing, it has a life of its own. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at the screen and winced. Local news wants a statement. Channel 7 is running the story at 6. Karen felt the walls of the interview room closing in around her. In less than 24 hours, she'd gone from being an anonymous insurance adjuster to being the face of entitled suburban rage. She was going to be a meme, a cautionary tale, a punchline that people shared at dinner parties. What are my options? She asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Marcus flipped through more pages of notes. The prosecutor is offering a plea deal. Guilty to Class A misdemeanor destruction of property, 2 years probation, full restitution, and 200 hours of community service. You'd avoid jail time, but you'd have a criminal record, and if I don't take the plea, then we go to trial, and you face the original charges. Felony destruction of police property, plus whatever else they decide to add. With the video evidence and multiple witnesses, our chances of acquittal are— He paused, searching for a diplomatic way to phrase it. Minimal. Karen closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself in an orange jumpsuit, sharing a cell with actual criminals. Women who'd committed real crimes, not just lost their temper over a parking space. The image was so absurd that she almost laughed, but the hysteria building in her chest warned her that once she started laughing, she might not be able to stop. There's one more thing, Marcus said, and something in his tone made Karen open her eyes. Detective Torres requested to speak with you personally before you make your decision about the plea. Why? He wouldn't say, but the prosecutor indicated that what he has to tell you might influence your decision. Karen's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Torres was going to offer some kind of deal, a way to make this all go away. Quietly, maybe he understood that she wasn't really a criminal, just someone who'd had a very bad day. Maybe there was still a way to salvage something from this disaster. When she asked, now if you're willing, Karen looked around the sterile interview room. at the concrete walls and the metal table, and the fluorescent lights that made everything look sick and yellow. In 12 hours, her biggest worry had been whether the barista would remember to use oat milk in her latte. Now she was contemplating plea bargains and prison sentences, and the complete destruction of her reputation. "Send him in," she said. Marcus gathered his papers and stood. "Karen, whatever he says, remember that you don't have to respond. Anything you tell him can be used against you." "I understand." But as the door closed behind her lawyer, and Karen waited for Detective Torres to arrive, she realized she didn't understand anything anymore. The world had become a foreign country where actions had consequences she couldn't have imagined, where 30 seconds of rage could unravel 30 years of careful living. The door opened again, and Torres entered. He looked tired, older than he had in the parking lot, and there was something in his expression that Karen couldn't quite read. Not anger, not satisfaction, something sadder and more complex. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Detective Torres. Karen tried to keep her voice steady. "I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for what happened to your car. I had no idea it belonged to a police officer." "I know," Torres said quietly. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years learning to read people. "Mrs. Whitman, how long have you been parking in that spot?" The question caught her off guard. 3 years, every Tuesday, the same time, same spot. And today felt different somehow. "More important that you get that particular space?" Karen started to give her The Channel 7 news van was parked directly across from Karen's house when she returned home at midnight, released on her own recognizance after posting bail. The reporter, a perfectly coiffed woman, in her 30s, spotted Karen's Honda and immediately signaled to her cameraman, but Karen gunned the engine and pulled into her garage before they could intercept her. Inside her darkened house, Karen leaned against the closed garage door and tried to catch her breath. Through the kitchen window, she could see the news crew setting up on the sidewalk, their equipment casting harsh shadows under the streetlights. Her phone had been buzzing constantly during the drive home, but she'd been too afraid to look at it now. In the safety of her own kitchen, she finally checked her messages. 47 missed calls, 132 text messages. Her voicemail box was full. The first few texts were from her coworkers at Meridian Insurance, ranging from confused "Karen, is this really you in this video?" to concerned, "Call me, ASAP, Mr. Davidson, wants to see you first thing Monday." But as she scrolled down, the messages grew increasingly hostile. Her phone number had somehow made it onto social media, and strangers were texting her everything from mild criticism to graphic death threats. "Hope you rot in jail. Psycho." Read one message. Another simply said, "We know where you live." Karen's hands shook as she turned off her phone and threw it onto the counter. The house felt different, somehow smaller, more vulnerable. Every creak of the foundation, every rustle of wind against the windows seemed amplified in the darkness. She was pouring herself a glass of wine when the doorbell rang. Karen froze, the bottle halfway to her glass. It was past midnight on a Tuesday. No one had any legitimate reason to be at her door at this hour. Through the peephole, she could see a figure on her front porch, but the lighting made it impossible to identify them. The doorbell rang again, followed by a sharp knock. "Karen, Karen, I know you're in there. We need to talk." The voice was familiar, though it took Karen a moment to place it. Janet Morrison from the Homeowners Association, the woman who'd appointed herself as the unofficial neighborhood watchdog. Karen had served on the HOA board with Janet for 2 years, enduring countless meetings about lawn maintenance standards and acceptable mailbox colors. Karen opened the door just wide enough to see Janet's face. Her neighbor looked grim, her usually perfect silver hair slightly disheveled, her expensive jogging suit wrinkled as if she'd thrown it on in a hurry. "Janet, it's very late. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Janet interrupted, pushing past Karen into the foyer. "Do you understand what this means for the entire neighborhood?" Karen closed the door and followed Janet into the living room, where her neighbor had already made herself comfortable on the cream-colored sofa. "I don't understand what you mean." "The news trucks, Karen? The reporters? The people driving by? Taking pictures of houses?" Janet's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Property values in Maple Grove Estates are going to tank because of your little stunt. That's hardly. I've already had 3 calls from the Henderson family asking if they should delay putting their house on the market. The Patels are talking about filing a complaint with the city about the media circus. And don't even get me started on what this is doing to our reputation as a community." Karen sank into her favorite armchair, the weight of Janet's accusations settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She'd been so focused on her own humiliation that she hadn't considered how her actions might affect her neighbors. "It'll blow over," she said weakly. "These things always do." Janet laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Karen, you're trending on Twitter. #ParkingLotKaren has been shared over 2 million times. This isn't going away anytime soon." As if to emphasize her point, a car drove slowly past the house, its occupants clearly gawking at Karen's front yard. Janet noticed it too, her mouth tightening into a thin line. "The emergency HOA board meeting is Thursday night. Janet continued. We're going to discuss options for managing this situation, including the possibility of asking you to voluntarily sell your house and relocate. You can't do that, Karen said, though her voice lacked conviction. The HOA's covenants were extensive and broadly written. If they decided she was damaging the community's reputation, they might have legal grounds to pressure her into leaving. We can't force you to sell, Janet admitted, but we can make living here very uncomfortable if we choose. 2. Noise complaints, violation notices, mandatory inspections. There are ways to encourage people to make better decisions. The threat hung in the air between them like smoke. Karen had seen the HOA target homeowners before, burying them in paperwork and violations until they either conformed or left. She'd even participated in some of those campaigns, believing she was helping maintain community standards. Now she was on the other side of that process, and it felt very different. I made a mistake, Karen said. A terrible mistake, but it doesn't change the fact that I've been a good neighbor for 5 years. I've served on the board, I've organized charity drives, you destroyed a police officer's car with a crowbar. Janet cut her off. On camera, while screaming like a lunatic. That's not the kind of neighbor we want, representing Maple Grove Estates. After Janet left, Karen poured herself another glass of wine and stood at her kitchen window, watching the news van across the street. The reporter was doing a live broadcast, gesturing toward Karen's house while speaking into the camera. Karen couldn't hear the words, but she could imagine them easily enough. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from her sister Rebecca in Phoenix. Saw the news? Are you okay? Call me. Rebecca. Sweet, successful Rebecca who'd married her college boyfriend and built a perfect life in the desert, complete with 2 adorable children and a husband who coached Little League. Rebecca, who'd always been Mom's favorite, who'd never had to fight for attention or respect, who'd probably never even raised her voice in public. Karen started to dial her sister's number, then stopped. What would she say? How could she explain the rage that had consumed her, the feeling that the world was constantly taking pieces of her dignity and she'd finally decided to take some back? Instead, she opened her laptop and did something she'd been avoiding all day. She watched the video. It was worse than she'd imagined. The camera caught everything, her face twisted with fury. The methodical way she'd destroyed Torres's car, the moment when she'd realized her mistake. But worst of all was the sound. Her voice, shrill and hysterical, screaming about respect and courtesy while she committed a felony in broad daylight. Thought the comments section was a nightmare. Thousands of people had weighed in, dissecting her appearance, her behavior, her obvious mental instability. Someone had found her LinkedIn profile and posted screenshots of her work history. Another person had located her divorce records and shared details about her settlement. Karen Whitman, insurance adjuster and failed wife, had become the internet's main character for all the wrong reasons. But it was the video responses that truly destroyed her. Dozens of people had created reaction videos, breaking down her behavior frame by frame. A popular YouTuber with 3 million subscribers had posted a 20-minute analysis titled, "The Psychology of Karen, When Entitlement Meets Reality." A comedian had done a 5-minute bit about her during his stand-up set, complete with impressions of her voice. She was a joke, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with entitled suburban women. Karen closed the laptop and walked upstairs to her bedroom, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Torres's face when he'd shown her that photograph. The gentle pity in his expression as he'd explained that her precious parking spot hadn't even been legal for months. At 3 in the morning, her doorbell rang again. This time, Karen didn't bother checking the peephole. She yanked open the door, ready to tell Janet or the reporters or whoever it was to leave her alone. Instead, she found herself face to face with Detective Torres. He was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a Metro PD sweatshirt, and he looked as tired as Karen felt. Behind him, the news van was gonna apparently even reporters needed sleep eventually. Detective Torres, Karen said, suddenly aware that she was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, that her hair was a mess, that she probably looked as broken as she felt. Mrs. Whitman, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I wanted to talk to you away from the station, away from the lawyers and cameras. Karen stepped aside to let him in, leading him to the living room where Janet had delivered her ultimatum just hours before. Torres settled onto the sofa, his trained eyes taking in the details of her home, the family photos, the carefully arranged books, the evidence of a life that had been orderly and controlled until yesterday. Nice place, he said. How long have you lived here? 5 years since my divorce. Karen sat across from him, wondering why a police detective was making small talk in her living room at 3 in the morning. Kids? No. Richard and I, we never had children. Torres nodded, and something in his expression suggested that detail mattered somehow. Mrs. Whitman, can I ask you something personal? Karen almost laughed. After the day she'd had, nothing felt personal anymore. Her entire life was now public property, dissected and analyzed by strangers on the internet. 6 months later, Karen sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked police van, adjusting the wire taped to her chest beneath a carefully chosen outfit that screamed easy target. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, a far cry from the shaking woman who destroyed Detective Torres's car in a parking lot that now felt like a lifetime ago. "Remember, you're Sarah Mitchell from Phoenix," Torres said through her earpiece, his voice calm and reassuring. "Divorced, lonely, recently inherited $50,000 from your grandmother. You're looking for companionship and maybe someone to help you invest your windfall." Karen nodded, checking her reflection in the side mirror. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the perfectly coiffed suburban insurance adjuster, replaced by a slightly frumpy woman in her 40s wearing too much makeup and clothes that didn't quite fit. The disguise was Torres's idea, part of an elaborate sting operation targeting romance scammers who'd been preying on vulnerable women across 3 states. "Target is approaching the coffee shop now," came the voice of Detective Lisa Chang through the radio. "White male, approximately 60, gray hair, wearing a blue button-down shirt. He's carrying a dozen roses." Karen's pulse quickened. After months of preparation, phone calls, and carefully crafted online conversations, she was finally going to meet Robert Harrison, the man who thought he was about to swindle $50,000 from a heartbroken widow. "You've got this," Torres said quietly, "just like we practiced." The irony wasn't lost on Karen that she was back at Java Junction, the same coffee shop where her old life had imploded. But the parking lot had been redesigned again since her infamous meltdown, and the spot where she'd once illegally parked was now occupied by a small memorial garden donated by the Meridian Insurance Company. Her former employer's attempt at community service after they'd fired her in the wake of the viral video. Karen took a deep breath and stepped out of the van, immediately slipping into character. She walked with the slightly hesitant gait of someone who'd been isolated for too long, her eyes scanning nervously for the man she was supposed to meet. The wire under her shirt felt heavy, but she'd worn it enough times during practice runs that it no longer seemed foreign. "Sarah?" The voice came from behind her, warm and practiced. Karen turned to see a distinguished-looking man holding roses, his smile perfectly calibrated to seem genuine, while maintaining just enough mystery to be intriguing. "Robert?" Karen let her voice carry a hint of breathless excitement. "Oh my goodness, you're even more handsome than your pictures." Robert Harrison, whose real name was Marcus Volkov, according to the intelligence Torres had gathered, beamed and offered her the roses with a theatrical flourish. "These pale in comparison to your beauty, my dear." Karen had to fight not to roll her eyes. In their phone conversations, Volkov had laid the charm on thick, but hearing it in person was almost comically over the top. She accepted the roses with what she hoped was an appropriately flustered smile. "Should we go inside?" she asked. "I'm so nervous. I haven't done this in years." "Of course, my darling. Lead the way." As they walked into the coffee shop, Karen caught sight of Chang at a corner table, typing on her laptop like any other remote worker. 2 more undercover officers were positioned at strategic points around the shop, ready to move if things went wrong. The operation had been planned down to the minute, with contingencies for every possible scenario. Karen had never felt more alive. The past 6 months had been a revelation. After Torres's unexpected offer that night in her living room, Karen had undergone extensive training with the Metro Police Department's fraud division. She'd learned about online scams, romance fraud, and the psychology of con artists. She'd practiced surveillance techniques, studied criminal behavior patterns, and discovered she had a natural talent for undercover work. Most importantly, she'd found purpose. The woman who'd once measured her worth by the respect she commanded in a parking space had become someone who protected vulnerable people from predators. The skills that had made her a good insurance adjuster: attention to detail, the ability to spot inconsistencies, a talent for making people comfortable enough to reveal information, translated perfectly to undercover police work. "So tell me about this inheritance," Volkov said once they were seated with their coffee. "It must be overwhelming to suddenly have so much money." Karen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, channeling the grief she'd felt during her divorce. "Grandmother was everything to me. She raised me after my parents died, but she was always so smart about money, and now I have all this cash and I don't know what to do with it." Volkov's eyes lit up, a predator sensing weakness. "Well, you're lucky you met me. I've been investing for 30 years. Made my first million before I was 40. The lies rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Karen knew from Torres's investigation that Volkov was actually a career criminal with convictions for fraud in 3 states. His investment expertise consisted entirely of taking money from lonely women and disappearing. "Really?" Karen widened her eyes with feigned admiration. $1 million. That's incredible. Maybe you could help me. I don't want to make any mistakes with grandmother's money. "Of course, my dear. But these things take time, trust. We need to get to know each other better first." Karen knew the script. Volkov would spend weeks building an emotional connection, making her feel special and loved, before gradually introducing the investment opportunity. He'd ask for small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there, to test her willingness to part with money. Only when he was certain of her devotion would he go for the big score. But Karen wasn't going to give him weeks. The wire she was wearing was recording every word, and Torres had enough evidence to arrest Volkov right now. The goal was to get him to explicitly offer fraudulent investment services, which would add federal charges to his local warrants. I understand about trust, Karen said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. But Robert, I have to be honest with you. I'm scared about the money. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I lose everything grandmother left me? Volkov's expression shifted into practiced sympathy. Sarah, darling, I would never let that happen to you. I care about you too much. Do you really? Karen let her voice break slightly. Because I've been hurt before. My ex-husband, he took advantage of me financially. I can't go through that again. I'm nothing like your ex-husband, Volkov said firmly. I want to protect you, to help you build a secure future. In fact, I have an investment opportunity right now that could double your money in 6 months. Karen's pulse jumped. There it was, the explicit offer they needed for the federal charges. Double it, she whispered. How is that possible? Volkov leaned forward. I have connections with international currency traders, high-risk, high-reward investments that aren't available to regular people, but because I care about you, I could get you in. That sounds almost too good to be true, Karen said, playing her role perfectly. The best opportunities always do, Volkov replied smoothly, but you have to act fast. These positions don't stay open long. Karen pretended to consider, watching Volkov's face as he calculated how much money he thought he could extract from her. She'd seen that look before, the same predatory gleam she'd witnessed in her ex-husband's eyes when he'd convinced her to co-sign loans she couldn't afford. In her former boss's expression when he'd asked her to work overtime without pay. Difference was that now she had the power to do something about it. I'd need to move the money from my savings account, she said finally. All 50,000, is that too much? Volkov's smile widened. Sarah, my dear, I think we're going to make a wonderful team. That's all we need, Torres's voice said in her earpiece. You did perfectly. Karen stood up from the table, her nervous demeanor evaporating like morning mist. Actually, Robert, I think you're right. We are going to make a wonderful team. Volkov looked confused for a moment, then wary as he noticed the change in Karen's posture and voice. Sarah, what? My name isn't Sarah? Karen said clearly, knowing the wire would pick up every word. And you're under arrest for attempted fraud? Chang and the other officers moved in smoothly, surrounding Volkov's table before he could react. The distinguished romance scammer looked around wildly, finally understanding that he'd been caught in his own game. This is a setup, he snarled at Karen. You're a cop. No, Karen replied, pulling off the wire and handing it to Torres as he approached. I'm something much worse for someone like you. I'm a woman who got tired of being taken advantage of. As Chang read Volkov his rights and led him toward the exit in handcuffs, Torres joined Karen at the table. The coffee shop had erupted in murmurs and phone cameras, but Karen found she didn't care about being recorded anymore. Let them film. This time, she was the hero of the story. How do you feel? Torres asked. Karen considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd been a bitter, lonely woman whose greatest achievement was consistently parking in the same illegal spot. Today, she'd helped take down a predator who'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from vulnerable women across multiple states.